everyone, welcome back to my channel. I know right now there's plenty of confusion in the market, especially with tariff and with the increasing property prices that never seems to come down. So the real question right now is, will there still be some value buys in the market? And I also heard from a few of my colleagues and even for myself as I was doing some research, I saw that there's actually quite a few developments that were having some star buys or mega discounts. So the real thing that we want to think about is actually which one is really worthwhile to consider. And today I'm going to use one of a case study that even I myself is extremely excited about this project, and I also share this with my client where both of us have also put down our check for. Before we dive deeper, let's look at what are the 3 non-negotiable requirements when it comes to right property selection. Of course, before I start any sharing, this is a disclaimer. Everything that I'm sharing with all of you is just my own research and my own analysis. If there's anything that you feel that you're not clear or you want to ask more about some details or analysis, feel free to reach out and I'll be more than happy to help you as well. So what are the 3 non-negotiable requirements that I will look into before I select a property for my client and for myself? The first thing I want to ask myself is, at which phase am I entering into? Which I'll explain more to you later. And the second question that I'll also ask myself is there still a price gap for my current protection? Because unlike all buyers, I also want to ask myself, if today I want to get my buyer to buy or even for myself to buy, I want to make sure the transaction is able to support this project. And the third point is, can I continuously enjoy good rental yield while I grow in value over these years? Because the truth is, a lot of people out there, they will be sharing about, talk about capital gain, talk about asset gain over 3 years to flip and stuff. But for me right now, I feel that it's very important to make sure I got second layer of protection, which is to ensure my rental yield is strong so that I don't have to rush to sell. I will still have an unfair advantage to hold on to this property, enjoying rental yield and enjoying capital gain at the same time. So I consider this as a double win. So let's talk about what is developer 3-phase strategy all about. I'm sure all of you who are watching this also have this big question you keep asking yourself. At which point should I actually enter into a new development? Should I enter when everyone else has already bought, indicating that it's a safe buy? Or should I enter when there don't seem to be a lot of people buying at this time, but I know that eventually the price will go up? So if I'm going to break this down into very simple terms, I'm going to call this a 3-phase strategy. So this 3-phase strategy you have to know if you are thinking of buying a private condo is, for all new development, developers has these 3 stages. The first stage, we call this the phase 1. It's usually the stage where developers open up for balloting, and also for people who wants to express interest, they put down a check and then they see what's their queue number and they decide from there. So at this stage, all of us would have known that it is actually the lowest possible entry price. We call this the early mover advantage. And phase 2 is where probably it reaches about 60% or so of the total number of units sold. And at phase 2, the price may have relatively gone up a bit. This is because developers by default will help to push up the price, and those who have bought in phase 1 would have enjoyed 1 to 3% of gains over just a very short time of maybe 1 to 2 months. So in phase 2 will be some buyers who are adopting a wait and see approach. Sometimes initially they may not want to enter into a project at the early mover because they are not sure. And when they come in, it's still at phase 2 and the question is it safe? It is still okay because at phase 2, most of the developers will only have inched up the price by a little. Now what will be very challenging for any investor is if you're actually buying the leftover stock, which most of the time we call this the phase 3. So the leftover stock could be like the last 10% or maybe the last 15% or so. So there's no specific percentage of a condo where it's or last 10% is phase 3. It doesn't work like that because it depends on the turn-up rate and the balloting process. But however, do be mindful that towards the end of last year, there were some very blockbuster condos that were launched, such as Emerald at Katong, Chuan Park and all this. So in the ballot itself, which is already 80 to 90% sold, there are already phase 1, 2 and 3 evidently in one balloting process. So if you're not too sure, it's very important to ask your agent so that he or she is better able to advise you at which phase are you entering into. So back to how is this important for you to know. It is important because for those of you who has actually have the chance to buy at phase 1, you might find out that by the time you realize it's gone up to phase 3, which is the leftover stocks that people are still buying, you may have seen a significant difference of between 2 to even sometimes up to 300 per square feet gain. So for all investors, we all want to go in at the lowest possible price and enjoy the maximum gains. So entering at phase 1 will be one of the safest entry price, and also expecting to have 2 to 300 per square feet gain when it reaches phase 3 is also quite a normal process. So let's take a look at some of the transactions that people have entered in phase 1 and 2. I'm going to take reference using Treasure at Tampines. If you take a look at Treasure at Tampines, you may realize that those who have bought at phase 1 and 2 has seen a very healthy profit of around 2 to 300,000 of gain just by a short holding period of about 3 years. So why is it important for you to know? Because if you take reference for this, right, you may realize those who bought at phase 1, their entry price was merely at 876 and also 885. But conversely, for those who end up buying at phase 3, you can see that the per square feet has gone up quite a fair bit from 1,000 to 1,003 range all the way to 1,007 towards the phase 3. That means if you put it down into numbers, it's about 297,000 of difference. So this is quite significant for people who are thinking of having more gains, because imagine it's either I will be the one to enjoy the 297,000 gain, or I will have to end up paying this 297,000 gain. Now, what is even more important for you to know is that for some of us who may want to wait and see, there might be an implication resulting in a poorer facing with a larger quantum, which means, for example, there's one that is actually facing the pool that has purchased during phase 1. As you can see, their entry price was only at 1.335 during phase 1. But later on, towards 2022, 3 years down the road, you can realize the entry price instantly became 1.6 million. Now, it is actually very significant because earlier I mentioned to you, if you are thinking of having good capital gain, you want to enter when the price is at the lowest possible. But if you wait a little longer, or maybe 1 or 2 years, or even up to 3 years later, you will end up realizing that the rest of the markets outside for the rest of the inventory are already priced so much higher that it's so hard to catch up. And by the time you come back to, let's say, Treasure at Tampines, the leftover stocks are likely most of the time a bit poorer facing, or maybe too high floor, quantum is very high, maybe even lofts and stuff like that. And you have to pay up to an additional $302,000. So this $302,000 has to come from your pockets, and frankly, it can be quite painful. So do have a serious consideration if you are thinking of buying a new launch for investment, because I really want you to understand the phase 1, 2 and 3 to ensure you get the best buy for your own property journey. If not, we end up paying more without realizing it. So now that you understand phase 1, 2 and 3, and that you have to try to identify projects that can still enter at phase 1, it is also equally important to tally with the second requirement, which is the price gap strategy. Now, why is price gap strategy very important? Because today I want to enter at phase 1. I want to have the best of both worlds. I also want to know that this price is still able to support with surrounding transaction with a good price gap. I know this is not easy to find because most of the new developments that we are buying probably is in a new township. And if it's in a new township, it's very hard for us to compare because the nearby projects might be relatively older. But if you ever have a chance to select a project with new surrounding new developments that are up and coming, and even some moderate to new developments that are newly TOP'd, then you are able to adopt this price gap strategy for yourself in this context. So how to determine to spot a phase 1 price still with a price gap strategy? Let's take for instance the Hill at One North, which is the project that myself and my client is very excited that we put down a check for. So why do we put down the check for Hill at One North? Because today, if I look at the transaction, the first thought that comes to my mind is, do I have an exit plan? Is my exit plan strong? So therefore, it has to voice back down to the numbers. So if you take a look at the transaction in Hugh at 1 North, you may realize there are transactions ranging from 2002 per square feet all the way to 2007 per square feet. And why is it important for you to know this? Because we know that the 2002 per square feet is the high ceiling unit. So I'm not going to take that into my benchmark, but rather I'm going to realistically focus on here all the way to here, because it will allow me to see, is my entry price safe or not. So averaging is about 2005 per square feet, with the highest being 2007. Now, most of the agents out there, if you speak to them, they will usually use the highest transacted per square feet to justify this is the price that has already transacted, so what you're buying is safe. But to me, if today I'm going to make a purchase, I will want to go deeper into the numbers and not just look at the highest transaction, because that one highest transaction does not mean that this buy is a safe buy. So now that we know the average transaction is 2005 to 2007, I also want to be able to know what are the benefits of this project. So one of the maybe not so good side about Hugh at 1 North is that it's a 142 units project. But however, if you have a look at this development, it's actually 100% landscaping, which means that actually the landscaping is quite nice and is situated right next to a park, which means the airflow is good and also is very family friendly. Now, what actually excites me is that I noticed that Hugh at 1 North is situated at a location that is walking distance to either Buona Vista MRT or even 1 North MRT. So with that, I also supported it with Rochester Mall, which is just 296 meters away. They're about 3 minutes walk. And Star Vista is only 400 meters away. So that means within 5 to 6 minutes, I have 2 malls with walking distance around me. Second, since MRT is also close to me, I think that is also a very good support. But nonetheless, if I can buy lower than the average transaction, is there still something that I can support it with? So therefore, when I dive deeper into Hugh at 1 North, I also realized that in this development itself, there were quite a fair bit of transactions inside. And in here, you can notice the 2007 transaction was just transacted in 13th of May. So what happens from April downwards? You can see that most of the transaction is about 2005 to 2006 per square feet. And the quantum that they're entering into is around 2.6 to even up to 2.9. So the first question is, if today I can get a unit over there at 2.3 over million, will this be a good buy for the same 3-bedder type? Question number 1. And second, how many units were actually transacted below what I transacted in this kind of quantum? So if you see that in December for Hugh at 1 North, there was one transaction at 2002 per square feet, which amounts to 2.5 million. That being said, that is a high ceiling unit. But generally, if you look at 1,023 square feet unit or even up to the 980 square feet unit, their transaction has ranged from around 2.4 million plus minus even up to 2.7. So I also noticed there's one very interesting transaction here that is around 2.367, which is a 980 square feet unit on the 10th floor. Now, why is it important for you to know this? Because today, if I'm going to enter Hugh at 1 North at this point of time, which has already launched about 1 year back, I may be very certain that I'm going in at phase 3. But right now, because there's actually a few units that are out for discounts, I noticed that I'm able to buy back at phase 1, and if not, some even lower than phase 1. So for a 10th floor unit, you may see that actually is transacted at 2.367. But if I'm able to buy at 2.365, I will think this is a steal. So that's why I went to research more about, will people be able to accept this kind of quantum? Let's say I want to sell in the market for about 200,000 to 300,000 more. We also know that Bloomsbury has just been launched, and based on Bloomsbury transaction, you will see that actually the transaction range from 2004 all the way to 2005 PSF. That having said, we also know that Blooms is a harmonized project, and the quantum that they're actually selling is 2.3 million all the way to 2.8 million. Now, why is it important for you to know this? Because today, if I want to consider Hugh as one of the projects that I want to buy, I want to know that actually a project that is so far away from MRT, literally no MRT around you. For example, Commonwealth MRT, which is the closest, is 960 meters. 1 North is at 1.04 kilometer, which is totally very hard to walk. And the rest are all more than 1 kilometer, which means that If people are looking for a project that is convenient with MRT, Blooms may not be a good competitor for me. But yet, they are transacting at 2.3 million up to 2.8 million. So now, the Hill at One North is also walking distance to 2 MRT stations as compared to Blooms. So this is one of the good points that I feel Hill is a good buy. But also, if you look at the surrounding amenities, you also realize that Blooms already have very few amenities. They may have some restaurants around them. But if you're talking about shopping mall, it's actually quite far away and all of them are more than 1 kilometer. Lastly, Blooms also do not have primary school. All of them are more than 1 kilometer for Fairfield Methodist, which is one of the highly sought after schools in this area. So I want to ask myself, if today Blooms that has no MRT, no mall, no school is able to transact at 2.3 to 2.8 million, then wouldn't this make Hill at One North one of a very good buy if I can still spot a 2.3 million range purchase for a 3-bedder? So if I dive deeper and open up all the transactions, I also realize that Blooms has transactions ranging from 2003 to 2004 per square feet, and essentially because they are harmonized, their square feet is lower and the quantum is about 2.1 to 2.3 million as well. Nonetheless, there's also transaction in Blooms for the larger units ranging from 2005 and the quantum is about 2.4 to 2.5 million. That having said, if Hill at One North square feet is 980 versus Blooms at 980, one have 2 MRTs within walking distance, 2 malls within walking distance, and 1 kilometer to Fairfield Methodist, is already transacting at 2.3 all the way to 2.7, while Blooms that has no MRT, no school, no amenities, is still able to transact for a 980 square feet at 2.5 million. Then the key question is, I'm seeing 200,000 of gap. So that made me felt that actually Hill seems to be a better buy than Blooms. Now, I'm not saying that Blooms is not a good buy for those of you who have already purchased Blooms or thinking if I should buy Blooms. I feel that at this point of time, if we want to select a project that I can feel confident about, I would be more towards Hill and One North until all their star buy units are sold out. Then we may fall back into the next best research, that is the next updated one. But at this moment, if I'm going to compare these two side by side, I will prioritize the other unit than Blooms. So now that I've shared so many things with you, let's put things into perspective and see how me as an agent help my client to plan their enter and exit strategy. Firstly, we know that today Hill at One North was actually transacting at around 2.4 to 2.7 million generally. And there's a few transactions at 2.3. Then these are already transacted, and over this period, we also noticed that Blooms has already transacted for a same 980 square feet unit at around 2.4 to 2.5 million. These are already transacted. So today, if I want to enter into Hill at One North, I will ask myself, if I can go in at 2.3 million, which is here, lower than phase 1 generally, and these people who bought it at 2.4 to 2.5 in the year 2025, let's say for another 3 years down the road, Bloom's owner who purchased will intend to sell it at 2.7 to 2.8 million. That would make sense, right? Because the entire reason why they are buying this area, if you are buying for investment, which is pretty easy to chart if you look at it. And for Hill at One North, let's say there's a 2.3 million purchase. If I look at this selling price, as mentioned, no school, no MRT, and no amenities, they will put up their unit at 2.7 to 2.8 million range for a same 980 square feet unit. Then me entering at 2.3 million with 1 kilometer to Fairfield, which is a sizable amount of demand in future, do I see myself being able to have a layer of protection to expect around 300,000 of gap? So I'm talking about a 980 square feet unit, which is already transacting at 2.4 to 2.5, which means that Blooms entering at 2.4 to 2.5 will eventually aim to sell at 2.7 to 2.8. And for me entering at Hill at One North at 2.3 million, I'm still able to, before sell, see the 300,000 gap that I'm assured. So that is what I mean by a layer of protection. Will I eventually want to sell? I'm not too sure. But at this moment, as I look at the numbers and the actual transactions, I'm actually looking at minimizing speculation and increasing my odds of protection. So you get what I mean? That's the reason why even for my client who is an avid investor, when he look at the numbers, he look at the transaction, he realized that actually Hill is one of a very good buy and without much consideration. So for those of you who are watching this at this point of time, I'm sure you're also wondering whether if I'm going to consider a new launch at this point of time, is there really a way for me to chart my entry and also make sense with a lot of research and nearby transactions for new launches and the newly TOP ones to see whether is there actually still a gap for me to enter, and if there is still a gap, what are the actual steps for me to do so that I can see this gap and feel assured for myself. If you're not too sure, feel free to reach out because I'll be more than happy to help you as well. And if you like the content that I'm sharing with you, do remember to click like and subscribe for my YouTube channel, because every week, every 2 weeks, we'll be updating new research and new contents and more case studies, which is highly requested for my clients to help them make sense of this whole property journey together. And in the upcoming sharing, we will also be talking about the leading and lagging indicators, how to identify when is the time you should take action, how to identify when you should actually wait to observe. Also, we also do quite a fair bit of webinar sharing with so many of our clients or our people that can we still be able to ride the wave in this uncertain market? If there is a chance for you to hop onto the wave, when is actually the sweet spot and when is a good time? So these are the things that we also talk about in my content and also in my webinar. So back to the third requirement. If you remember, I shared about the 3 phases of developer and why is it important for you to know. We also shared about the price gap strategy using transactions nearby for similar age properties. And also, lastly, some of us may not actually want to sell out immediately. Some of us want to buy it for rental yield. And it just so happened that when I was thinking through this, I also asked myself, will I still want to flip this next project that I'm buying? Or if there is a chance for me to enjoy good rental yield at the same time and still get to have capital gain, is this really the best of both worlds for any investors? And let's dive into the numbers. So for One North Eden, which is a newly TOP project, it is also a 165 unit, which is quite comparable with Hill, and is also just TOP in 2024. It is also within 1 kilometer to Fairfield Methodist, and in terms of MRT, it is also as similar to Hill. Now, I want to be very specific with this because today I want to make sure I increase my odds of success of buying into an investment to make sure that I can rent and grow at the same time. So question is, if One North Eden is able to have enough transactions to support my high rental yield, then this will be a very good push factor for me to take it forward. So that having said, what does it actually mean by high rental yield? The key is, most of us will be thinking, can I use my rental to support my monthly mortgage? Now, in terms of reality, I always tell all my clients, you really need to ask yourself, what is the purpose of buying this property? If the rental happens to be able to cover your mortgage, of course, this is the best of both worlds. And sometimes, if it's a little bit of shortfall, do you have the emergency funding to cushion it? Because the truth is, interest rate goes up and interest rate comes down. Sometimes, if we don't have enough funding to cushion when interest rates are high, then it will be quite a challenge. So for those of you who are thinking of buying a unit to rent out, you have to ensure you need to look at what is the lowest transacted rental and the highest transacted. Take the median and ensure you have enough funding in case interest rates are high. Remember this because I've seen some clients not planning this ahead of time and eventually have to force sell their unit, which is definitely the last thing on my mind. So if today I'm considering Hill, I also need to consider the fact that upon key collection, which is TOP, I'm going to expect my monthly mortgage to be around 6,300. This is on the account that I'm taking 75% loan and for my age, 25 years. So if it's a 6,300 of monthly mortgage, the question is, can I cover? I'm not expecting that 100% have to cover, but can it at least be substantial enough to cover this, if can, 80 to 90% of it? And then it just so happened that One North Eden has sufficient transaction to support my positioning. Because if you look at One North Eden 3-bedder transactions, I noticed that actually there are transactions ranging from 6,350 all the way to 7,500. as someone who is very conservative, I always encourage my client to look at the median. So you see, there's also 6,001 transaction and there's also 7,005 transaction. So average transaction over here, I will regard as about 6,005 plus minus. So if I take 6,005 plus minus as the average rental transaction, and I want to calculate my gross rental yield, I may realize that 6,005, if I do it over a period of 12 months, I would have received 78,000 of total rental income. But I do need to offset 1 month away for my property tax, because we all know that property tax is about 1 month of our monthly rental. So if I set that aside, I will now realize that I'm actually only taking back 71,500. So if I'm taking back 71,500, next question that comes to my mind is, will I still have rental yield that can hit 3% at least? And when I work out the numbers, I realized 71,500, which is the 11 months rental, versus my actual purchase price of 2.359 million, I noticed my gross rental is still 3%. So that having said, it gave me a very good big boost that this seems to be a very exciting move, because it's not easy to find a project that can give me rental yield and growth at the same time with such location. So lastly, I went into the total gross gains to realize that, let's say, if this property continuously grow on 5% per annum over the next 3 years, I would have a total of 315,000 of gains. Together with my rental that I collected for the next 3 years, which will amount to 214,000, my total gross gains at the end of the 3 years investment will get me 529,000. So this number is very healthy, at least to me and to my client. And if you feel that this is also something that is very logical, and you feel that this is also something that you are looking for, then do remember to reach out, because there might be still some buys in the markets at this point of time. So I actually went down to calculate what's next after Hill, because as we enter and we plan our exit, we also want to know what is in for me when I want to exit at the end of 3 years. So let's say if I do a purchase price of 2.359, which is the price that I'm looking at, over a period of 3 years, I may have a gain of 371. So why is the number different? Because I need to offset the interest incurred over the years. That is the reason why you realize the net profit became 314,000 instead of 371. So interest aside, I'm taking 314,000. And at the end of 3 years, or even like in 2028, 2029, if I want to sell, I would have noticed what I would have with my cash and my CPF on hand would be 970,000 altogether for the total down payment and my gross gains, plus the rental that I'm collecting at 214,000, which means at the end of 3 years, I'm going to expect a 1.184 million in my pocket for me to move on to the next project. So this is something that I personally find that is very exciting, because if I choose to stay put and look around for other projects, I may not be able to experience or benefit from this kind of amount. So that's why careful planning is very important. You need to find the right entry price, and you make sure that you have good price gap, you make sure that you have good rental yield, and at the same time, you also want to know when you sell next time, how much actually are you going to take back? Does the amount actually excites you? If the amount excites you and you can see yourself moving forward to the next better property after, then this project would be a good project for you. Earlier, I have actually covered the 3 non-negotiable requirements when it comes to property selection. But on top of that, I also want to ask myself, let's say for example, in 2028 onwards, I want to hold for another 1 to 2 years because market may not be the best to sell at that time. Can I afford to wait? And if I can afford to wait, what supports it? So this is the reason why knowing the future expansion of where our government is headed is very important. Not just MRT, but are they actually taking actions to open up more lands for residential, because they expect more people to come into this area, which I can see happening in this area as well. More and more white zones are actually transformed to residential plus commercial, which is mixed. And even for Bloomsbury surrounding, there's actually 5 more plots that are converted to residential. So if you have watched my previous episode on how government land sale pushes up the price, you can also see that one of the very essential things is, if the land bid is very low, for sure our government will not release it. After Bloomsbury, there will be 5 more residential plots launched. And out of these 5, one of them has already been bidded by Qingjian, which is also Bloom's developer. Now the question is, why does Xinjiang wants to actually bid 2 blocks at the same area? So this is something that we want to ask ourselves, because if the developer does not see the potential in this area, they also will not come in. Next is also, we also want to accept that if the bids are too low, our government will also not release. So our government is not in a rush to let go of all these lands, and they're also waiting for sincere bidders to bid this land because they clearly have a clear direction on where they want to spearhead the upcoming area over here. So one last very important and very personal experience for myself when it comes to property selection is, if you have followed me, you have realized that I bought Clavon as my very first largest unit, which is a 5-bedder. And concurrently, as I was selling Clavon, I wasn't too bothered that, there's no elite schools around it. But when I actually started putting up Park Clementi's for sale, which is this one, I noticed that the demands were totally different. Why do I want to share this very personal story about this? I used to feel that, at certain area you need to buy as bigger size as you can. And with that, the per square feet is lower. But when I was actually concurrently selling Park Clementi's, which is 1 kilometer to Nanhua, versus Clavon, which is no school except for Peitong, it brought to my attention that the amount of viewers that I have for Park Clementi's way surpass more than what I have for Clavon. For example, in one weekend, I can expect Park Clementi's to have about 15 viewers, whereas one weekend for Clavon could be just 2 viewers. This significant difference has kind of brought up to my attention that although there might be a lot of research done for many projects that doesn't have elite schools around it and still performs very well, I also want to be extremely careful when I do my next property selection, because personally, when I'm selling 2 at the same time with such close proximity, the feedback that I've gotten on the ground when I'm interviewing all these buyers is that they feel that the reason why they're going for Park Clementi's is not because the location is nearer to MRT, which is not. It's because of the school. And because of the school, they really have a need to buy this area. They are also alumni, the kids already studying here, the sibling will also be studying here. So this community of school has proven time and again to be so strong and the demand to be so stable. So if I were to reverse this and be even more stringent in my next property selection, I will try to ensure that at least there is a school in future, so that when I want to wait and rent out, I can still have this advantage to rent it out and concurrently still see a healthy growth and demand if I want to sell. So this is just something of my own personal experience, and I do want to share this with you. I also went in to look at Park Clementi's and Clavon's distance. Actually, if you take a look at it, it's only 200 meter difference or less than 200 meter difference in terms of MRT. So it's not because of the MRT, but rather it's because of the school. If you realize, Clavon has NUS High School of Math, but that is not the main demand for primary school enrollment. And the rest are not really within 1 kilometer for the better school, which is Nanhua. And this is what Park Clementi's have that I don't have. So personally, if you are someone who wants to have another layer of safety net, my personal account is try to prioritize one with school. So at least you can feel that I have my 3 requirements met, and I even now have a school, which gives you even an additional layer of confidence when you go into the property selection. And then in terms of profitability transaction, it's not too far off. For Park Clementi's, it has gone up to about 1 million. And for Clavon, it has gone up to 929, so not too far off. Essentially, it's really about the demand, the stability in the demand, knowing that anytime when you put out for sale, someone will come and view, someone will want to offer. It will be so much easier to offload for you to move on to the next property if you want to by the time. I've come to the end of my sharing. In the next coming episode, I'll be sharing a real-life case study with you on how my client, who actually have a nice queue number for BTO, dropped the BTO queue number, went into a resale HDB, sold off the 5-room and is thinking about whether should she buy a resale condo or buy a new launch. And eventually, what is her final decision? So stay tuned for the next episode to find out.